The October wind carried the smell of wood smoke and dying leaves through the open bay door of Jessup's garage, where Earl Jessup lay on his back beneath a Ford pickup that had seen better decades. His knees ached. His shoulders ached. Everything north of his belt buckle had filed a formal complaint sometime around his 70th birthday and hadn't let up since. He was 74 years old, and he'd been fixing engines in this shop for 51 of those years. The garage sat on a 2-lane blacktop outside of Kabul, Missouri, the kind of road that used to matter before the interstate pulled all the traffic 20 miles west. Earl's father had built the place in 1952, back when Route 60 was the main artery through the Ozarks, and a good mechanic could make an honest living keeping travelers moving. Now, the paint was peeling. The pumps out front hadn't worked since '08, and most days Earl saw more deer than customers. He finished tightening the oil pan and slid out from under the truck, groaning as his spine remembered its grievances. The shop was quiet except for the radio playing low, Merle Haggard, always Merle Haggard, and the wind, rattling the loose siding on the north wall he kept meaning to fix. The photograph watched him from its place above the register. Marlene in her wedding dress, 1973, smiling like she knew a secret she wasn't telling. She'd kept the books for 46 years, made coffee for every customer, remembered the names of their kids and grandkids. When she died 2 years ago, loss, the doctors called it, like she'd simply misplaced her heart, Earl had considered closing up, selling off, following her into whatever came next. Instead, he'd kept opening the doors every morning at 7, the way he had since Nixon was president. He didn't know how to do anything else. The rumble reached him before the bike did, a deep, unhealthy stutter that spoke of timing chain trouble. Earl wiped his hands on his rag and walked to the bay door as a Harley limped into the lot, its rider fighting to keep it upright as the engine coughed and died. The rider was a woman, mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a braid and a leather vest heavy with patches. Sisters of the Road Massey, the top rocker read. President, said the patch below it. Her road name was stitched beneath, Roadhouse. She kicked down the stand and pulled off her helmet, revealing a face weathered by sun and highway wind. Please tell me you're open. Depends on what's wrong with it. Started knocking about 50 miles back. Thought I could make it to Springfield, but she had other ideas. She patted the tank like she was comforting a sick horse. It's the timing chain, isn't it? Sounds like. Earl walked a slow circle around the bike, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Could be the tensioner. Could be worse. Won't know until I open her up. How long? Few hours if I've got the parts. Longer if I don't. The woman, Roadhouse Rita, whatever her name, looked at the empty highway, then at the sun already sliding toward the tree line. I've got a chapter meeting in Joplin tomorrow morning. Whole club's riding up from Arkansas. Then I'd better get started. He wheeled the bike into the bay and set to work. Rita settled onto the bench by the door, pulling out her phone to make calls. Earl heard fragments, broke down outside Kabul. Yeah, the middle of nowhere, I know, and smiled to himself. Middle of nowhere. That's what everyone called it now. Time was, this had been the middle of everything. The work was familiar, meditative. His hands knew what to do even when his mind wandered. Strip the cover, inspect the chain, check the tensioner guides. The chain was stretched, the tensioner shot. He'd have to rig something from his parts bin. He didn't stock Harley tensioners, hadn't had call to for years, but he'd made worse improvisions work. 2 hours in, Rita appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee she'd made in the ancient pot by the register. Figured you could use this. Appreciate it. He took a sip. She'd made it strong, the way Marlene used to. Your club, Sisters of the Road. I've heard of you. We do charity runs mostly. Toys for kids, supplies for shelters, that kind of thing. Started out as a bunch of women who got tired of being told we couldn't ride. She leaned against the workbench. My father was a mechanic. Shop like this, down in Little Rock. Taught me everything about engines before I was 12. What happened to him? Heart attack. I was 15. She looked at the photograph of Marlene. That your wife? 46 years. She's beautiful. She was. Rita was quiet for a moment, then, my club's going through some changes. Bigger outfit wants to absorb us. Merge, they call it, but we both know what that means. I've been fighting it for months, but... She shrugged. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just holding on because I don't know how to let go. Earl understood that better than she knew. He didn't say so, By the time he'd finished the repair, the sun was gone and the stars were coming out, hard and bright the way they only got away from city lights. He'd fabricated a tensioner from parts that weren't meant to go together, but it would hold. It would get her to Joplin and back. "What do I owe you?" Rita asked, reaching for her wallet. Earl looked at the bike, at the woman, at the road stretching empty in both directions. He thought about his father, who'd never turned away a traveler who couldn't pay. He thought about Marlene, who used to slip extra food into the bags of customers she knew were struggling. "Nothing." "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Nothing." He wiped his hands on the rag. "My father used to say this road was built by people helping each other get where they needed to go. Consider it a contribution to the cause." "I can't accept that." "You can. My shop, my rules." Rita stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her vest and pulled out a pair of riding gloves, old cracked leather, patched in half a dozen places. "These were my father's. I've carried them for almost 40 years. She pressed them into his hands. "You hold on to these. I'll be back for them. And when I come back, I'm paying you what I owe, with interest." Earl looked at the gloves. They smelled like oil and old leather and someone else's history. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not how it works." She pulled on her helmet. "What's your name?" "Earl. Earl Jessup." "Earl Jessup." She said it like she was memorizing it. "I won't forget." She rode out into the darkness, the Harley running smooth, its new tensioner holding true. Earl watched her taillights disappear around the bend, then went back inside to close up. On the workbench, next to the gloves, was an envelope he hadn't noticed before. He opened it, with hands that suddenly felt unsteady. A notice from the county. His property taxes were 18 months delinquent. The total owed was $14,600. A tax sale had been scheduled for Friday, 3 days from now. If the balance wasn't paid in full, the property would be sold to the highest bidder. Earl read it twice. Then he sat down on the bench where Marlene used to sit and do the books, and he looked at the photograph of his wife, and he didn't know what to say to her. 51 years, 3 days, and a stranger riding west with his kindness in her pocket, and no idea what it had cost him. He picked up his father's pocket watch from its hook by the register, the one piece of the old man he'd never sold, no matter how tight things got, and held it in his palm, the weight of it, the ticking of it. All those years, measured out in seconds, 3 days. He didn't know how he was going to tell his son. The call to Danny went about as well as Earl expected. 18 months? His son's voice crackled through the phone, sharp with disbelief. "Dad, how did you let it get to 18 months? Things got away from me after your mother passed. I thought I had more time." "You thought—" Danny cut himself off. Earl could picture him in his office in Kansas City, pinching the bridge of his nose the way he did when he was trying not to lose his temper. "I could have helped. I've been asking you for 2 years if you needed help, and you kept saying you were fine. I was fine. You're about to lose the shop." "I'm aware of that, Daniel." The silence stretched. Earl looked at the photograph of Marlene and wished she were here to smooth things over. She'd always been better at talking to Danny, better at admitting when things were hard. "I'll drive down tomorrow," Danny said finally. "We'll figure something out." "You don't need to—" "Dad, stop. I'm coming." A pause. "I love you, even when you make it impossible." The line went dead. Earl set down the phone and sat in the silence of the shop, listening to the wind rattle the loose siding. Danny arrived the next afternoon in a rental car that cost more per day than Earl, made in a week. He was 47 now, with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, wearing a suit that probably cost more than the shop's best month. He'd left Kabul at 18 with a scholarship to Mizzou and never looked back, built himself into something Earl didn't fully understand. Financial consultant, whatever that meant. Numbers on screens. Money moving in ways that had nothing to do with oil and metal and honest work. They stood in the bay together, father and son, and the distance between them felt wider than the years. "The property's worth something," Danny said, studying the tax notice. "Location's not great, but the land itself, maybe 40,000-50,000, if we sold to the right buyer." "I'm not selling." "Dad, this shop was your grandfather's. He built it with his own hands. Your mother and I raised you in that apartment upstairs. I'm not selling it to some developer who'll turn it into a gas station or a storage unit." Danny set down the notice. "Then what's your plan? Because right now, your plan is to lose everything in 3 days." Earl didn't have an answer. He'd been awake most of the night trying to find one, running the numbers that never added up no matter how many times he counted. $14,600. He'd be lucky to scrape together $2,000 if he sold every tool he owned. There might be another option. Danny pulled out his phone, scrolled through something. The buyer who requested the tax sale, his name's on the county filing. Marcus Webb. He's a real estate investor out of Springfield. Buys up distressed properties, flips them, or develops them. So maybe he'd negotiate, agree to a payment plan, give you more time. These guys usually want the path of least resistance. If you can show him you're serious about paying. With what money? Danny's jaw tightened. I can help. I've got savings. I'm not taking your money. Why not? Because it's yours. Because you earned it. Because I didn't spend 50 years teaching you the value of hard work so you could bail out your old man's failures. It's not failure to need help, Dad. Danny's voice had an edge now. It's not weakness. It's just life. Things happen. People struggle. That's what family's for. Your mother would agree with you. Then why won't you? Earl looked at the photograph again. Marlene, smiling her secret smile. She'd told him, toward the end, that pride was just fear wearing work boots. He hadn't understood what she meant until now. I'll talk to Webb, he said. Tomorrow. See if there's room to negotiate. I'm coming with you. No, this is my mess. I'll handle it. Danny looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded once and walked outside to make a phone call, leaving Earl alone with the ghosts of 51 years. Marcus Webb's office was in a new building on the commercial strip in Springfield, all glass and chrome, and the particular smell of money being made by people who never got their hands dirty. Earl wore his cleanest work shirt and tried not to feel like a specimen under glass. Webb was younger than he'd expected, mid-40s, fit, with the kind of handshake that was calibrated to communicate power without crushing. His office had a view of the city and a wall of photographs showing ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings, a man building his empire one foreclosure at a time. Mr. Jessup, Webb gestured to a chair. I appreciate you coming in. I know this must be difficult. I'm here to ask for more time, a payment plan, whatever it takes to keep my property. Webb leaned back in his chair. I respect that. I do. My father was a small business owner, hardware store in Branson. I watched him struggle my whole childhood. He paused. That's actually why I do what I do. Properties like yours, they're stuck. Bleeding money, draining their owners. Sometimes the kindest thing is to let them go. Start fresh. That shop has been in my family for 70 years. I understand, but sentimentality doesn't pay the bills. Webb pulled a folder from his desk. I've had my eye on that corridor for a while. Your property sits right where the county's planning to widen Route 60. 5 years from now, that land will be worth 3 times what it is today. Then let me pay you back over 5 years. I'm not a bank, Mr. Jessup. I'm an investor, and investors need returns. Webb opened the folder, slid a document across the desk. I'll make you an offer. $45,000 for the property as is. That's more than fair market value. You walk away with money in your pocket, no debt, no stress. You could retire. Spend time with your family. Earl looked at the document. The numbers swam in front of his eyes. My wife is buried in the cemetery behind that shop, he said. My father's tools are still hanging on the wall where he left them. My son took his first steps in the bay. That's not something you can put a price on. Everything has a price, Mr. Jessup. The question is whether you're the one setting it or someone else. Webb's voice wasn't cruel exactly, just certain. The tax sale is Friday. If you can't pay the full balance by then, the property goes to auction. I'll win that auction, I always do, and you'll walk away with nothing. Or you can sign this today and walk away with something. Earl stood up. His knees protested, but he ignored them. I'll find another way. There isn't another way. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Webb stood too, and for a moment something flickered in his expression. Regret, maybe, or the memory of watching his own father lose. I'm not the villain here. I'm just the one willing to tell you the truth. Earl walked out without shaking his hand. That night, he sat in the shop with the lights off, holding his father's pocket watch and listening to it tick. 70 years of Jessup's, working this land, serving this road. And in 2 days, it would all be gone because he'd been too proud to ask for help, too stubborn to admit he couldn't do it alone. The headlights swept across the windows just before midnight. Earl walked to the bay door and watched as a single motorcycle pulled into the lot, a Harley running smooth, its rider wearing a vest heavy with patches. Rita killed the engine and pulled off her helmet, and even in the darkness he could see the set of her jaw. "You lied to me," she said. "Excuse me?" "I made some calls, asked around, found out about the tax sale." She walked toward him, boots crunching on gravel. "You fixed my bike for free while you were about to lose everything. Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't your problem." "You made it my problem when you gave me kindness I didn't earn." She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the anger in her eyes, and something else beneath it, something that looked like recognition. "My club's being pressured to merge with a bigger outfit. The Iron Wheels out of Oklahoma. They've got money, numbers, influence, and for months I've been telling myself I can fight them alone. That asking for help means admitting I'm not strong enough." "What changed?" "You. Standing in your shop with the world falling apart, giving away work you couldn't afford to give." She reached into her vest and pulled out her phone. "I've got 200 sisters in 6 states. I've got contacts in a dozen other clubs who owe us favors, and I've got until Friday to prove that sometimes the right thing to do is let other people carry part of the weight." "I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm telling." She held up the phone, showing him a stream of messages. "Word's already out. The clubs are mobilizing. By tomorrow morning, you're going to have more help than you know what to do with." Earl looked at the messages, names he didn't recognize, places he'd never been, people who'd never met him agreeing to ride across the state lines because a woman they trusted had asked them to. "Why?" he asked. "Why would they do this for a stranger?" Rita smiled. It was tired and fierce and full of something he couldn't name. "Because that's how it works. Someone helps you, you help someone else. The road takes care of its own." She tucked the phone away. "Now, you got any coffee in this place? We've got a lot of planning to do, and I haven't slept since Joplin." Earl looked at her, at the shop, at the photograph of Marlene, smiling her secret smile. "Yeah," he said. "I've got coffee." He went inside to put on a pot, and behind him, Rita was already making calls. By dawn, the plan had taken shape. Rita spread a map across the workbench, marking routes and rally points with a red pen, while Earl watched and tried to keep up. Sisters of the Road would mobilize from Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. The Desert Brothers out of New Mexico owed Rita a favor from a charity run 3 years back. The Iron Horsemen from southern Missouri had already confirmed 18 riders. Word was spreading through channels Earl didn't understand. Social media, group texts, phone trees that reached back decades. "The goal is visibility," Rita explained, circling Kabul on the map. "We show up in force, make it clear this isn't just one old man against a corporation. We get the local news out here, maybe the Springfield stations. Webb's business depends on his reputation. If he's seen as the guy who bulldozed a 70-year-old family shop while hundreds of bikers watched, that's bad for business. And if he doesn't care about his reputation, then we raise the money." She pulled out her phone, showed him a crowdfunding page someone had set up overnight. 14,000's a lot, but split across enough people, it's manageable. $20 from 700 people, $50 from 300. The numbers work if we can get the word out. Earl stared at the page. His name was on it. His shop. A photograph someone had pulled from God knows where, showing him 20 years younger, standing in the bay with a wrench in his hand. "I didn't ask for this." "No, you asked for nothing, and that's the problem." Rita's voice was gentle but firm. "Sometimes the hardest thing isn't doing it alone. It's admitting you can't." Danny arrived at 8, looking like he hadn't slept. He stopped in the doorway of the shop, taking in the map, the phones, the woman in leather who'd apparently taken command of his father's crisis. "Who are you?" "Rita Delgado. I run the Sisters of the Road." She extended a hand. "You must be the son." "I must be." Danny shook her hand, then looked at Earl. "Dad, what's going on?" "Help arrived." "I can see that. I mean—" He gestured at the organized chaos. "This is a lot. For a tax bill." "It's not about the tax bill." Rita pulled out a chair for him. "Sit down. Let me explain." She told him about the free repair, about her father's gloves, about the network that existed just beneath the surface of ordinary life, people connected by roads and rides, and the unspoken agreement that you helped when you could, because someday you'd need help too. Danny listened with the particular expression of a man whose worldview was being rearranged without his permission. He shook his head. This is not how things work. You can't just mobilize hundreds of strangers to save a garage in the middle of nowhere. And yet, Rita smiled, here we are. By noon, the crowdfunding page had raised $3,000. By evening, it had crossed $8,000. The comments section filled with stories, people who'd broken down on Route 60 and been helped by Earl or by his father, or by mechanics, just like them, in towns just like this. Strangers sharing memories of kindness they'd never forgotten. Earl read them until his eyes blurred. He hadn't known. All those years, all those small repairs and free tows and cups of coffee for travelers who couldn't pay, he'd never known any of it mattered beyond the moment. Thursday night, the first bikes began arriving. They came in groups of 3 and 4, pulling into the lot as the sun went down, their headlights cutting through the autumn dark. Sisters of the Road from Little Rock, Desert Brothers from Albuquerque, a crew of veterans from a riding club in Tulsa who'd heard about Earl's service in Vietnam and wanted to stand with a fellow soldier. By midnight, there were 40 bikes parked in neat rows beside the shop. By 2 in the morning, 60. Riders set up tents in the field behind the garage, started fires in the old oil drums, passed around coffee and stories while the stars wheeled overhead. Earl walked among them, shaking hands, learning names, feeling like a stranger in his own home. These people had driven hundreds of miles for him, for a shop they'd never seen, for a man they'd never met. You okay? Danny appeared at his elbow, holding 2 cups of coffee. I don't know what I am. Earl took the cup, wrapped his cold hands around it. Your mother would have loved this. All these people, all this... He didn't have a word for it. Community, Danny said. Yeah, that. They stood together in silence, watching the firelight flicker on chrome and leather. After a while, Danny said, I'm sorry I stayed away so long. After Mom died, I should have been here more. You had your life, your work. That's not an excuse. I told myself you were fine because it was easier than facing the fact that you weren't. That I wasn't either. Danny's voice was rough. She was the glue, wasn't she? The one who held us together. Without her, I didn't know how to... Neither did I. Earl looked at his son, really looked, and saw the grief he'd been too wrapped up in his own pain to notice. I kept the shop open because I didn't know how to stop, but I think part of me was hoping I'd just run out one day, like a clock winding down, join her wherever she went. Dad, I'm not saying it right. Earl pulled out the pocket watch, held it in his palm. Your grandfather gave me this when I took over the shop. Said it was a reminder that time runs out for everyone, so you better spend it on things that matter. He pressed it into Danny's hand. I've been spending mine wrong, holding on when I should have been reaching out. I don't want to do that anymore. Danny looked at the watch, at his father, at the crowd of strangers who'd gathered to save something they'd never seen. Then let's make sure you have the chance to do it different. The call came at 6 in the morning, just as the sky was beginning to lighten. Rita answered, listened, and her face went still in a way that made Earl's stomach drop. What? He asked when she hung up. Webb. He found out about the fundraiser, about the riders. She took a breath. He filed an emergency motion with the county. Claims the crowdfunding constitutes organized interference with a legal proceeding. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. We can't use any of the donated money to pay the tax bill. Can he do that? He just did. Rita's jaw was tight. The hearing to contest it isn't until Monday. The tax sale is tomorrow. The news spread through the camp like a cold wind. Earl watched the riders' faces change, hope curdling into anger, determination hardening into something dangerous. A man from the Tulsa crew started talking about paying Webb a visit. Someone else mentioned lawyers, injunctions, fighting fire with fire. No. Earl's voice cut through the noise. No threats, no intimidation. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? The Tulsa man stepped forward. Because right now it looks like the rich guy wins again while the rest of us watch. Maybe he does. Maybe there's nothing we can do about the money. Earl looked around at the crowd. 200 faces now, maybe more, lit by the pale dawn. But that's not why you came here. You came here because someone told you a story about a man who helped a stranger, and you wanted to be part of something that mattered. That doesn't change because some lawyer filed some paper. So what do we do? Earl didn't have an answer. He looked at Rita, at Danny, at the photograph of Marlene visible through the shop window, and then he knew. We show up, he said, all of us, at the courthouse, at the auction. We stand there and we let Webb see what he's taking. Not just a shop, a community, a history, something you can't put a price on. He paused. And maybe that doesn't change anything. Maybe he buys the property anyway and bulldozes it next week. But at least he'll have to do it while we watch. At least he'll have to look us in the eye. The crowd was silent. Then Rita stepped forward. I spent months fighting the iron wheels because I was afraid that merging meant losing who we were. But standing here, looking at all of you, she gestured at the mix of patches and colors, clubs that had been rivals now standing shoulder to shoulder. Maybe who we are isn't about the name on the patch. Maybe it's about what we do when it matters. She pulled out her phone and started typing. What are you doing? Earl asked. Calling in one more favor. There's someone who needs to see this. She looked up, and there was something fierce in her eyes. Someone who might be able to help in a way the money can't. The sun broke over the tree line, spilling gold across the lot, catching chrome and leather and the faces of 200 people who'd driven through the night for a stranger. Everyone get some rest, Rita said. We ride at noon. The convoy stretched for nearly a mile, 250 motorcycles rolling down Route 60 toward the Texas County Courthouse in Houston, Missouri, their engines creating a sound like rolling thunder. Earl rode in the back of Danny's rental car, watching through the window as the bikes filled both lanes, chrome flashing in the midday sun, American flags and club colors streaming in the wind. He'd never seen anything like it. In 51 years on this road, watching travelers come and go, he'd never imagined he'd be the reason for something like this. The town of Houston had a population of 2,000 on a normal day. Today, it looked like the entire state had shown up. News vans lined the square. Spectators crowded the sidewalks. The sheriff had brought in extra deputies just to manage traffic, and they stood at intersections with expressions that wavered between bewilderment and something like awe. The bikes parked in formation around the courthouse, neat rows, engines cutting off one by one, until the sudden silence felt louder than the thunder had been. Riders dismounted and gathered on the courthouse lawn, a sea of leather and denim and patches from a dozen different clubs. Someone had made a banner. Jessup's Garage, 70 years of service. Someone else had printed photographs of Earl and Marlene, of his father breaking ground in 1952, of 4 generations of a family who'd made their living helping strangers get where they needed to go. Earl stood at the edge of the crowd, Danny beside him, and felt something swell in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Earl, Rita appeared at his elbow. There's someone I want you to meet. She led him through the crowd to where an older woman stood apart from the others. She was perhaps 70, dressed simply, with white hair pulled back and eyes that held a particular kind of steadiness. She didn't wear a patch or carry a helmet. She looked like someone's grandmother, which Rita explained she was. Earl, this is Dorothy Webb, Marcus Webb's mother. Earl went still. You called his mother? I called a friend who knew a friend. Word got around. Dorothy stepped forward, and up close he could see the weariness in her face, the particular exhaustion of a woman who'd watched her son become someone she didn't recognize. Mr. Jessup, I've heard a lot about you in the last 12 hours, about your shop, your family. I don't know what you think you can do. Your son seems pretty set on... My son is trying to undo a hurt he's never gotten over. He thinks if he controls enough, owns enough, he'll never have to feel powerless again. Her voice was quiet but firm. I watched his father lose everything when Marcus was 15. It broke something in him that never healed right. He's been running from that scared boy his whole life. That's not my problem to fix. No, but maybe it's mine. She looked toward the courthouse where the auction was set to begin in 20 minutes. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm asking you to let me try to reach him. One last time. Earl studied her, this woman who'd raised a man he had every reason to hate, who'd come here not to defend her son, but to confront him. There was something in her face that reminded him of Marlene, the particular courage of women who cleaned up messes they didn't make. What do you need from me? Just time. A few minutes before the auction starts. Can you give me that? He nodded. What else could he do? Dorothy walked into the courthouse alone. The crowd waited, murmuring, uncertain. Earl found himself standing next to Rita, both of them watching the doors, like something might come through them that would change everything. How do you know her? he asked. I don't, but I know her daughter, Marcus's sister. She rides with a club out of Branson. When I told her what was happening, she made a call. Rita's jaw was tight. Family's complicated. Sometimes the only person who can reach someone is the one they've been running from. The minutes stretched. 10, 15. The auction was scheduled for 1 o'clock, and the clock on the courthouse tower was ticking toward it with mechanical indifference. At 12:58, the doors opened. Marcus Webb walked out first, his face unreadable. Behind him came Dorothy, and behind her, a man in a suit Earl didn't recognize, the county tax assessor, probably, or some other official whose job it was to convert homes and histories into numbers on a ledger. Webb stopped at the top of the courthouse steps. He looked out at the crowd, at the bikes, the banners, the faces of 250 people who'd driven from 6 states to stand witness. His expression flickered, something moving behind his eyes that Earl couldn't read. "Mr. Jessup," his voice carried across the lawn. "Could you come up here, please?" Earl climbed the steps, feeling every one of his 74 years in his knees and his back and the uncertain beating of his heart. He stopped a few feet from Webb, close enough to see the tension in the man's jaw, the shadows under his eyes. "My mother tells me I've become my father's worst nightmare," Webb said quietly, meant just for Earl. A man who takes from people what should never be taken, who puts numbers ahead of names. Is she wrong? No. Webb looked away, toward the crowd, toward something only he could see. "My father's shop was called Webb's Hardware. He opened it when I was 6. I used to sit behind the counter and watch him help customers, fixing things, explaining things, treating everyone like they mattered." His voice tightened. When the chain store moved in, he tried to compete, took out loans, extended credit, did everything he could to keep the doors open, lost it all in 18 months. "I'm sorry for that, but it doesn't give you the right to do the same to me." "No, it doesn't." Webb turned back to him. "My mother asked me a question just now. She asked me what I thought my father would say if he could see what I've become. A man who buys debt and forecloses on family businesses. A man who profits from other people's worst days." Earl waited. The crowd was silent, straining to hear. "I don't have an answer," Webb continued. "I've been telling myself for years that I'm being realistic, that I'm just playing the game everyone else is playing. But standing here, looking at all these people who drove hundreds of miles for a man they've never met..." He shook his head. "That's not a game. That's something I don't have a word for." "It's called community," Earl said. "It's what happens when people decide they're not alone." Webb was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, the clock tower struck 1. The auction was officially scheduled to begin. "I'm withdrawing my bid," Webb said, loud enough now for the crowd to hear, "and I'm releasing the restraining order on the crowdfunding money. As of this moment, I have no claim on the Jessup property." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confusion, disbelief, the first stirrings of hope. "I don't want your pity," Earl said. "It's not pity. It's..." Webb struggled for the word. "It's payment for a debt I didn't know I owed until today." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "There's a check in here. $15,000. Enough to cover the back taxes and give you a cushion." "I can't accept that." "You can. My shop. My rules." A ghost of a smile crossed Webb's face. "Someone told me once that's how it works." Earl looked at the envelope, at Webb, at Dorothy, standing quietly behind her son with tears on her cheeks. "Why?" he asked. "Why the change of heart?" "My mother reminded me of something I'd forgotten. When my father lost his shop, the whole town showed up. Not to buy things, just to say goodbye. To thank him for 40 years of service. He cried that day. I thought he was crying because he'd lost. But my mother said no. He was crying because he realized how much he'd mattered." Webb's voice roughened. "I've spent 30 years trying to never be that vulnerable. But standing here, I think maybe that vulnerability was the point. The willingness to matter to people, even knowing they might leave." Earl took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. "Your father sounds like a good man." "He was. I forgot that for a while. I'd like to try to remember." Webb extended his hand. "I'm sorry. For what I tried to do. For what I almost took from you." Earl shook it. The grip was firm, but something in it had softened. The particular loosening of a man who'd set down a weight he'd been carrying too long. The crowd erupted. Cheers, horns, engines starting and revving in celebration. Rita was suddenly beside him, hugging him hard enough to hurt his ribs, and Danny was there too, and people he'd never met were clapping him on the back like he'd done something worth celebrating. Wait! Earl held up a hand, and slowly the noise subsided. Before we celebrate, there's something I need to do. He walked down the steps and into the crowd, searching for a face. He found her near the back, Dorothy Webb, standing alone, watching her son with an expression that held grief and hope in equal measure. "Thank you," Earl said, "for whatever you said to him. I told him about his father's last words. He'd never asked before." Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. Harold said, "Don't let Marcus forget that things matter less than people. Don't let him become hard." She wiped her eyes. "I failed him for 30 years. I didn't know how to reach him. But today, maybe today, was a start." Earl pulled the father's gloves from his jacket, Rita's gloves, the ones she'd entrusted to him 3 days ago. "These belonged to Rita's father. She gave them to me as a promise that she'd be back, that I wasn't alone." He pressed them into Dorothy's hands. "Give them to your son. Tell him they're from someone who understands what it means to carry a father's legacy and how easy it is to carry it wrong." Dorothy looked at the gloves, at Earl, at the crowd of strangers who'd become something more. "Thank you," she whispered. Earl nodded and walked back to his son, to Rita, to the 250 people who'd ridden through the night for him. The sun was bright overhead, the autumn air crisp and clean, and somewhere in the distance a single engine started, the first rider heading home, carrying a story they'd tell for years. "Let's go," Earl said. "I've got a shop to reopen." 6 months later, spring came to the Ozarks like an apology for winter. The dogwoods bloomed white along Route 60, and the air carried the smell of fresh rain and new growth. Earl stood in the bay of Jessup's garage, watching the morning light pour through windows that Danny had helped him replace in February. New glass, new frames, new weather stripping on the doors. The bones of the place were the same, but it breathed easier now. The tax bill was paid. The crowdfunding money, released the day after the courthouse, had covered not just the debt, but 6 months of breathing room. Earl had tried to return the excess, but the donors wouldn't hear of it. "Fix the place up," they'd written. "Make it last another 70 years. So he had. New siding on the north wall, the one he'd been meaning to fix for a decade. A fresh coat of paint, the same red his father had chosen in 1952. The pumps out front worked again for the first time since 2008. Danny had found a company willing to service them, and now travelers could fill their tanks as well as their bellies at the little diner counter Earl had installed where the parts shelves used to be. That had been Marlene's idea, in a way. He'd found her old notes in a drawer one night, sketches she'd made years ago, dreaming of expanding, adding food service, making the garage into a real rest stop. She'd never mentioned it to him. Maybe she'd been afraid he'd say no, that he was too set in his ways. She'd probably been right. But she wasn't here to say, "I told you so," and Earl figured the least he could do was build what she'd dreamed. The diner was small, 6 stools at a counter, coffee and sandwiches and pie from a bakery in Kabul, but it was enough. Travelers stopped now who would have driven past before. They ate, they talked, they signed the guest book Earl had started on opening day. Marlene's photograph hung above the register, and sometimes people asked about her, and Earl told them. It got easier each time. Danny came down from Kansas City every other weekend now. He'd taken a leave of absence from his firm in January, temporary, he called it, though they both knew better, and spent his time helping Earl with the books, the marketing, the 1,000 small details that kept a business alive. He was good at it, better than Earl had expected, better than Earl had let himself see. They didn't talk about the lost years. There was no point in accounting for grief, measuring who'd failed whom and by how much. They just worked side by side, the way Earl and his father had worked when Earl was young. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it was everything. The pocket watch sat on Danny's nightstand now, in the apartment above the garage where he slept on weekends. Earl had seen him holding it one morning, turning it over in his hands, listening to it tick. He hadn't said anything. Some inheritances didn't need words. Rita called every few weeks with updates. The merger with the Iron Wheels had gone through in March. Not the hostile takeover she'd feared, but a genuine partnership. She'd negotiated hard, kept the sisters' name and colors as a distinct chapter, won seats on the combined leadership council. "Turns out asking for help doesn't mean giving up control," she'd told Earl. "It just means being smart about who you ask." She was planning a charity ride for June, she said, a loop through the Ozarks ending at Jessup's garage, all proceeds to a scholarship fund for kids in rural Missouri who wanted to learn a trade. Earl had offered to match whatever they raised, up to $5,000. It was more than he could afford, but some things mattered more than money. Marcus Webb had surprised everyone, Earl most of all. 2 months after the courthouse, a truck had pulled into the garage lot carrying lumber and tools. Webb had stepped out in work clothes, looking nothing like the man in the expensive suit, and asked if Earl needed help with the renovations. "Why?" Earl had asked. "Because I don't know how to use a hammer," Webb had said. "My father tried to teach me, but I never learned. I thought I was too good for it." He'd looked at the shop, at the faded Jessup's garage sign. "I'd like to learn now, if you're willing to teach me." Earl had handed him a hammer without a word. They'd worked together for 3 weekends, side by side, not talking much. Webb had blisters by the end of the first day, and calluses by the end of the month. He wasn't good at the work, but he showed up, and sometimes that was all that mattered. The last time he came, he'd brought the gloves, Rita's father's gloves, the ones Earl had given to Dorothy. They were cleaned and oiled, the old leather supple again. "My mother said you wanted me to have these," Webb had said, "but I think they should stay here, with the other things that got passed down." Earl had hung them on a hook by the register, next to Marlene's photograph and the guest book. 3 things that didn't belong together, except they did. A woman who'd loved this place. A book full of strangers who'd stopped here and left pieces of themselves behind. And a pair of gloves that had traveled from father to daughter, to stranger, to enemy, to something like a friend. The bell above the door chimed. Earl looked up from the engine he was tuning to see a young woman with a baby on her hip, looking frazzled and tired. "Please tell me you're open," she said. My car's making a noise I don't like, and I've got 300 miles to go." Earl wiped his hands on his rag and smiled. "Let's take a look," he said. "You want some coffee while I work? My son just put on a fresh pot." She smiled back, the particular relief of a stranger who'd found help when she needed it. "That would be amazing. Thank you." Earl walked out to her car, feeling the spring sun on his face and the good weight of work waiting to be done. Behind him, Danny was already pouring coffee, asking the woman about her trip, making her feel welcome. The road stretched out in both directions, the way it always had. Travelers coming, travelers going, everyone heading somewhere, and in the middle of it all, a little garage with a red roof and a neon sign, keeping the promise his father had made 70 years ago. Some things were worth holding on to. Earl was learning that letting people help you hold them wasn't weakness. It was just the next part of the road. Sometimes the help we give comes back in ways we never expect, and sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing we do. If this story moved you, subscribe so you never miss one. And tell us in the comments, who showed up for you when you needed it most?